In 1990, the FDA made a quiet announcement. A red synthetic dye used in lipstick, maraschino cherries, and children's candy was being removed from cosmetics. The reason it caused cancer in animals. The FDA's own scientists flagged it. There was even a law written in 1960 that said any additive shown to cause cancer in animals must be removed from the food supply. Red dye 3 triggered that law, so the FDA banned it. From lipstick, the FDA decided this chemical was too dangerous for lipstick, but safe enough for children to eat. That wasn't an oversight. That was a decision, and it tells you almost everything you need to know about how the American food system actually works. Red dye 3 is a synthetic dye made from petroleum. Europe banned it in 1994. In America, you could find it in Pez candy, Conversation Hearts, Peeps, products designed specifically for children. The FDA knew their own law required action. They didn't take it. Let that land for a second. The agency that flagged this dye as a carcinogen kept it in children's food for 34 years. The law was there. They just chose not to apply it. In January 2025, 34 years later, the FDA finally banned red dye 3 from food. Not because the evidence changed, because the pressure did, which raises the obvious question, what else is still waiting? To understand how this keeps happening, you need to understand one word, GRAS, generally recognized as safe. It was created in 1958 for ingredients so common, so ancient, that formal review seemed unnecessary: salt, vinegar, baking soda. But the food industry discovered something. Any ingredient could potentially qualify. Here's how it works today. A company wants to add a new chemical compound to food. Instead of submitting it to the FDA, which takes years, they hire their own panel of scientists. The company hires its own scientists, reviews its own data, declares its own chemical safe, and then puts it on supermarket shelves. No FDA review, no waiting period, no public disclosure. Now imagine a pharmaceutical company approving its own medication with no independent review, no clinical trials submitted to regulators, just an internal declaration, and then selling it directly to patients. That would be criminal for medicine. For food ingredients, it's standard practice, and it's been standard practice since 1997. In 1997, under pressure to cut costs and reduce backlogs, the FDA made this process entirely voluntary. Since then, companies have used self-approval for nearly 99% of new food additives. A 2013 Pew Research study estimated that over 1,000 ingredients were added to the food supply through this pathway without the FDA knowing they existed. There's a good chance at least one of those ingredients isn't something you ate today. The agency's own former deputy commissioner admitted it publicly in 2014. We simply do not have the information to vouch for the safety of many of these chemicals. The system designed in 1958 to exempt salt and vinegar from paperwork became the primary pathway for every new synthetic compound entering the American food supply. And it's still open. Europe and America don't just have different regulations, they operate on opposite philosophies. In America, an ingredient is considered safe until proven harmful. In Europe, a manufacturer must prove safety before an ingredient can enter the food supply. Same science, opposite burden of proof. That single difference explains why the same product, made by the same company, has completely different ingredients depending on which country it's sold in. Open a box of Kraft mac and cheese in the United States. That bright orange color comes from yellow 5 and yellow 6, synthetic dyes derived from petroleum. Now open the same box in the UK. The color comes from paprika extract and beta-carotene, natural pigments found in vegetables. Same brand, same box, different formula. Not because Kraft lacks the technology to use natural dyes in America, because in Europe, yellow 5 and yellow 6 require a mandatory warning label, may have an adverse effect on activity and attention in children. Kraft didn't want that warning on the box, so they reformulated it for Europe. Same company, same product, 2 different decisions for 2 different markets. In 2011, an FDA advisory committee reviewed the same evidence that led Europe to require the warning label. The committee voted. 8 scientists said the evidence is sufficient. Act 6 disagreed. The majority said act. The FDA overruled the majority. No warning, no label change. The dyes stayed. In 2022, after 2 years of independent review, The European Food Safety Authority reached a conclusion about an ingredient called titanium dioxide. It's a whitening agent. You'll find it in candy, chewing gum, frosting, hundreds of packaged products. They're finding titanium dioxide can no longer be considered safe for use in food, not because it causes immediate harm, because it cannot be ruled out as genotoxic, meaning it may cause damage to DNA. The EU banned it. The FDA's position on titanium dioxide has not been substantially updated since 1966. That's not a typo. When the FDA last formally reviewed this ingredient, the beetles were still together. The ingredient is still in your candy. Here's what makes all of this so revealing. These companies aren't being forced to use cheaper ingredients in America. They're choosing to. When a market requires reformulation, they reformulate. When a market doesn't, they don't. The exact same multinationals that sell clean versions in Europe sell petroleum-derived dyes in the United States. Not because they can't do better, because doing better costs money they're not required to spend. That's not a safety standard, that's a business decision, and you're on the wrong side of it. So what does this mean for you? Next time you're in the grocery store, flip the package over. If you see yellow 5, yellow 6, or red 40 in a product aimed at children, the European version of that same product almost certainly doesn't contain them. If you see titanium dioxide in candy or gum, that ingredient has been banned in Europe for 3 years. And here's the simplest test. Find out if the product you're holding has a European version. If it does, and the ingredient lists are different, you're looking at a company that knows exactly how to make a cleaner product and chose not to sell it to you. That's why Europe banned these dyes. That's why the FDA still approves them. That's why the same company makes 2 versions of the same product and ships the cleaner one somewhere else. The science doesn't change at national borders. The regulations do. The cleaner version already exists. They just decided you don't get it. That's why.